Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here, and it is Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week. And this week is absolutely insane. The amount of breaches, some of the organizations are probably going to have you raising your eyebrows. This was a crazy week. Now, before I begin, as always, I'd like to thank the following people that just sent me this information in whatever form it was. And if you have a tip for me, please send it my way. It always helps me out. And this week, that would be Jacqueline Wolf, David Walker, Chris Fallon, Jason Dance, Barrett Peterson, and Ronaldo Abreu. Guys, thank you very much. And as always, it's appreciated. And with that, let's start with Arbiter Sports. Now, they are a referee and game official management software for sports leagues like the NCAA here in the United States. And they just disclosed a security incident that impacted around 540,000 of its registered members, which consists of referees, league officials, and school representatives. Apparently was a ransomware attack in July of this year, and the company said that despite detecting and blocking the attackers from encrypting its files, the intruders did manage to steal a copy of its backups. And so heads up, if you are a referee or sports official in some way, your personal information may be out there. So obviously that's a big issue. Moving on, let's talk about the U.S. Department of Interior. This is interesting because wireless networks within the U.S. Department of Interior have actually been successfully breached, but not by any kind of high-tech equipment, but basically on the cheap by the Office of Inspector General personnel as a test of their defenses. They basically did a DIY $200 setup in a backpack wireless tester and were able to get through. I actually have one of those myself, so it's actually pretty inexpensive to make, but here we go. This basically underscores that the interior isn't set up to adhere to NIST standards as required by federal law. And so guys, if you need help, I am the person for NIST 800-171 and 853. Department of Interior, call me. Moving on, let's keep with the United States government and talk about the Veteran Affairs. They had a data breach last week that I reported on, and this is the update. Now, if you recall, last week attackers gained access to an application used by the financial services of that organization, and essentially they were able to hijack it because 6 payments intended for community care providers were rerouted to attackers' databases. Roughly 46,000 U.S. veterans were affected by this. Now, in a letter to the VA Secretary Robert Wilkie, Senators John Tester, Patty Murray, Sherrod Brown, Richard Blumenthal, Mazie K. Hirono, Joe Manchin, Kristen Sienna, Margaret Wood Hanson, and Jean Shaheen expressed serious concerns about the ability of the VA to protect veterans and community care providers' data, and called for the VA to provide assurances the department is capable of safeguarding personal and financial data. And to quote the senator's letter, based on information currently available, it appears this cybersecurity incident was carried out by those able to find weaknesses in the way VA authenticates community care healthcare providers using VCAs and process payments for their services. Obviously, this is a very serious issue, and when government entities are failing to live up to their own standards set forth by their government, this is what we end up with. Once again, this is basically them not fully adhering to NIST 800. Obviously, a very problematic issue, rather, for the government. Moving on, let's talk about Microsoft. Yes, Microsoft, because they suffered a very rare cybersecurity breach on their watch earlier this month when the company's IT staff accidentally left one of Bing, that is the Google competitor, back-end servers exposed online. Now, Microsoft is saying that no personal information was affected and the vulnerability has been closed, but it underscores that we have, obviously, even in the, not just the government, but large corporations and organizations, oftentimes don't live up to their own standards. And with that, let's talk about Google, because Google is on our list as well, because they actually offer cloud buckets. Now, you might have heard me talk about Amazon's S3 buckets, basically a place to store data. Google obviously has a competing platform, and about 6% of all Google Cloud buckets are misconfigured or vulnerable to attack, according to analysis of 2,064 buckets. 131 of these buckets were vulnerable to unauthorized access by users who could list, download, and or upload files. Those buckets obviously can typically contain things like files, database, source code, credentials, and on and on and on. Now, attackers could obviously exploit these vulnerabilities to steal data, compromise websites, launch other attacks as well. And apparently, the researchers are saying that the vulnerabilities they were finding in this 6% of Google Cloud buckets was very easy to exploit. And some of the exposed data that they uncovered were 6,000 scanned documents, including passports, birth certificates, and personal profiles from children in India. So that's obviously a very huge issue. And so, like an Amazon bucket, if you're running a Google bucket, you gotta lock those things down. Moving on, let's talk about Blackbaud. I'm once again going to give you an update, as I have every week for the past months, I think months and months and months. If you recall, they are basically used by hospitals and charities for donor management and all of that. And basically everybody's come out of the woodwork. And so this week, the following organizations have declared breaches thanks to Blackbaud: Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, Christ Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio, St. Francis Xavier Catholic Schools in Wisconsin, Appleton, Wisconsin, the University of Tennessee Medical Center, and that's what I've got this week. I'm sure there's going to be more. Stay tuned next week for that. Moving on, let's talk about the University of Tasmania, not a Blackbaud thing, but personal details belonging to 20,000 of their students were available publicly basically from February to August 11th. This was mistakenly made public due to misconfigured security settings. Students were obviously informed of this breach that obviously made their data available for about 5 months or so. And the analysis says that a number of users had access with emails to this university. So heads up, if you go to the University of Tasmania or did or still have one of their email addresses, you may be affected. Moving on, let's talk about Shopify. Yes, this is the massive online e-commerce giant that claims just more than 1 million merchants or customers. And the company said that two members of its support team, 2 Shopify employees, access and tried to obtain customer transaction details from Shopify merchants. Now, Shopify estimated that the number of stores that might have been affected by this is at least, or rather less than 200. Obviously, as I mentioned, they have more than 1 million accounts, so 200 is not much, but it's obviously very significant for those 200. Now, Shopify said that the incident is not the result of a vulnerability, but rather the action of rogue employees, and they are actually going to be taking legal action. Moving on, let's talk about an organization called Town Sports International. They are the owner of well-known United States fitness centers and gyms, including New York sports clubs, Boston sports clubs, Philadelphia sports clubs, Washington sports clubs, Lucille Roberts, not sure what that is, and Total Woman Gym and Spa. They have an exposed database that contains the user records for almost 600,000 of their members and staff, containing personal information such as names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, last 4 digits of credit card expiration dates, and member billing history. This database is now secure as of September 22nd. But if you belong to any one of those gyms, heads up to you. Moving on, we're going to be talking about a company called CHSPSC LLC. They're out of Tennessee, and they are a management company that works with hospitals. Apparently on April 10th, 2014, they suffered a cyber attack by an advanced persistent group known as APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat 18. Using compromised admin credentials, the attackers remotely accessed CHSPSC's information systems via their VPN or virtual private network, and this organization failed to detect the intrusion and was notified by the FBI on April 18th, so basically 8 days later, that its systems had been compromised. HIPAA finally got around to violating them, and their fine? $2.3 million, one of the largest for 2020. So heads up to you, you probably could have had a lot cheaper defense more effectively for less than $2.3 million. Moving on, because this week is the week of massive companies, let's talk about Instagram, obviously owned by Facebook, massive social media platform. A critical security vulnerability with the Instagram app actually lets attackers take over the victim's Instagram account and can actually change their phone and configure it into a spying tool. Now, researchers from Checkpoint Security found a vulnerability within Instagram's third-party library known as MozJPEG, which is an open source project used by Instagram as its JPEG format decoder for images that are uploaded to Instagram. Now, an attacker can exploit the vulnerability by sending the target or the victim basically via email, WhatsApp, or another basically another platform, getting them this information, sending them an Instagram. And once the victim opens this Instagram on their phone, the exploitation occurs and it allows the hackers, and I quote, full access to any resources in the phone that is pre-allowed by Instagram. Essentially, they are infecting the Instagram, and as soon as you tap it open, it infects you and takes over your machine. So if anybody is sending you anything from Instagram, I don't care if it's a friend, you shouldn't open it at all. Another massive corporation has a breach. Now, let's talk about another massive corporation, which is Luxottica. They own something like 90% of the entire eyeglass market on the planet, and they own such brands as Ray-Ban, Oakley, Michael Kors, Prada, Chanel, Versace, and many more. They've actually been accused of predatory practices by consuming other eyeglass companies like Oakley, for example. I read a whole thing on that a while back. They have some issues because Bleeping Computer has reported that a vulnerability in their Citrix ADX controller, which is obviously a popular entry point for ransomware attacks, could allow access to the company's network, resulting essentially in a shutdown for Luxottica. Now, customers were reporting that websites for some of the major brands of Luxottica were not working, which obviously raises a question of a breach of their systems. Right now, we don't know much more than that, but if Luxottica got breached, that's a huge issue. I am currently wearing a pair of their glasses, and so here we go. Moving on, let's talk about the COVID-19 basically tracking or surveillance tool built by the Uttar Pradesh state government in the country of India, because it got compromised on August 1st, leading to a massive data breach of those basically Indian citizens that downloaded this app to help with contact tracing and all of that. Now, according to researchers, various vulnerabilities were exploited to compromise the surveillance platform, but the primary reason behind the breach was what is, and I quote unquote, a severe lack of security. 8 million Indian citizens may have a risk of exposure. I would assume those that are probably living in Uttar Pradesh would be the most predominantly ones, of Indian citizens that are affected here. And I'm just going to say, people wonder why many are so reticent to put government tracking apps for COVID-19 on their phones. Aside from possible privacy issues from the actual government or state itself, this isn't actually the first time I've had to report bad programming for apps like this that are leaving whatever country is developing this citizens at risk. The last one that I talked about was in Scandinavia. I mean, this is a huge issue worldwide. So if you're one of those 8 million Indian citizens probably living in Uttar Pradesh, heads up to you. Moving on, let's talk about Tyler Technology. This is actually a large company you've never heard of. They are Texas-based, and they bill themselves out as the largest provider of software and technology services to the United States public sector. Now, according to Brian Krebs, the author, they are, and I quote, battling a network intrusion that has disrupted its operations. The company declined to discuss the exact cause of the disruption, but their response so far is straight out of the playbook for responding to ransomware incidents. Tyler eventually said, and I'm cutting Brian Krebs' article short here just in the interest of time, but Tyler eventually said, and I quote, "We apologize for the late night communications, but we wanted to pass along important information as soon as possible. We recently learned that two clients have report verbatim suspicious logins to their systems using Tyler credentials. Although we are not aware of any malicious activity on client systems, we have not been able to investigate or determine the details regarding these logins. We wanted to let you know immediately so that you can take action and protect yourselves. Basically, go ahead and change your passwords, and hopefully you've got multi-factor authentication with identity management enabled as you are working with Tyler Systems or Tyler Technologies. And that's obviously a very serious problem because, again, they are feeding the public sector, meaning the U.S. government and probably smaller local and state governments as well. Moving on. Let's talk about Martin County, Florida. State and local law enforcement agencies are investigating an apparent attack basically on the Martin County website. Officials were unaware that apparently there was 3-year-old data stored off-site was stolen. It was actually stolen from this, and they didn't know it until a person actually contacted the county's legal department early this week. Now, here's the interesting thing. According to spokesperson Martha Ann Nice, and I'm assuming I'm pronouncing that right, apologies, Martha, if I'm not, the caller, meaning somebody picked up a phone and called, didn't threaten the county or ask for ransom. The person's motives, however, quote unquote, is not altruistic. And this is according to the county in a news release. So apparently somebody called to say, I got your stuff, heads up, but it really wasn't altruistic. Now, apparently the stolen data is nothing that this attacker could use against the county, according to their spokesperson, calling it non-actionable and also a little threat. Still, the spokesperson, Martha Ann Nice, could not provide details of what information or files were compromised. So heads up to you. If you're in Martin County, Florida, that's obviously a very big issue. Moving on, let's talk about another massive corporation, and that would be Activision. Yes, the gaming giant, because reports of over 500,000 Activision accounts have reportedly been hacked in a new Activision data breach on September 20th, leaving basically 500,000 or so Call of Duty players in limbo. But Activision is saying this is fake news. To quote them on September 21st, reports suggesting Activision Call of Duty accounts have been compromised are not accurate. As always, we recommend that players take precautions to protect their Activision accounts as well as online accounts at all times. So we will see where this goes, but reports are saying they were hit. Activision is screaming that they're not. We'll see where that shakes out. But that is your other major, massive corporation for the week. And we're not done, because now we're going to be talking about U.S. Bank. Yes, one of the largest banks in the United States, because apparently on July 30th of this year, a computer server containing personally identifiable information was physically stolen from an undisclosed U.S. bank corporate office. Somebody robbed the bank, literally. The breach data reportedly includes names and account numbers, but may include additional sensitive information. Further details are not yet released, and on September 18th, U.S. Bank began notifying affected customers of the data incident without explanation of the delay in notification. Again, it would hit on July 30th. They're notifying on September 18th. They filed this with the CCPA in California, which is why we know about this. So heads up to you, U.S. Bank customers. Moving on, let's talk about a company called RadNet. They do radiology centers. They have almost 300 in the United States. And on July 18th, an unknown third party gained access to one of their servers that was used to store certain employee data and then copied those files out. Now, apparently names, social security number, driver's license numbers, and potentially other data, I'm reading right off their report here, that might include a birth date, address, passport number, may have been among the information accessed. It seems like it's employee data only. So if you work for RadNet, heads up to you. Moving on, let's talk about a company called ShopBack. They are an e-commerce cashback platform out of Singapore. And a spokesman for Singapore's Personal Data Protection Commission said that it was notified by ShopBack of an incident and investigations are still ongoing. In an email to customers this past Friday, as reported by the Sunday Times in Singapore, ShopBack said it became aware of unauthorized access to its systems that contained customer data from a few days ago, and they're obviously still investigating. So if I have any major updates, I'll let you know. Also out of Singapore is a company called Red Doors. They do hotel management and booking services. One of their IT databases suffered a breach last week, and in a statement, it said no sensitive data pertaining to financial information, such as customer credit cards or passwords, was compromised to the best of their knowledge, and as they unfold that, I will let you know if there's something major. And finally, and we have two finalies for this week. The first one we're going to be talking about is high-ranking Belarusian police officers. If you know, right now they're going through some civil strife due to an election with their current leader, Lukashenko. And so this is obviously a very sensitive issue that could potentially get some people killed here. But a group of attackers leaked on yesterday apparently, the names and personal details of more than 1,000 high-ranking Belarusian police officers in response to violent police crackdowns against anti-government demonstrations. Once again, the Lukashenko government is cracking down on protesters contesting the election that recently happened there. The leaked data included names, dates of birth, and the officer's department and job titles. Details for 1,003 police officers were leaked via a Google spreadsheet, with most of the entries being for higher-ranking officers such as lieutenants, majors, and captains. And so obviously that's a very, very tough situation right now as there's violence in the street over a contested election. Knock on wood, that doesn't happen anywhere else. And finally, we have to talk about an unknown, as of right now, U.S. federal agency, and this is absolutely crazy. A hacker gained access and exfiltrated data from a federal agency, according to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, this past Thursday. Now, the name of this federal of this federal agency, as well as the date or any details, is not being made public at the moment, obviously for security's sake. But CISA officials revealed that the attack, after publishing an in-depth incident in the report detailing the intruder's every step, was actually published, so you can read that. The report reveals how the intruder gained access to the federal agency's internal networks through different channels, such as leveraging compromised credentials for Office 365 accounts, domain administrator accounts, and credentials for the agency's Pulse Secure VPN server. Now, the CISA said the attacker logged into 365 accounts to view and download help desk attachments with internet access and quote-unquote VPN passwords in the subject line. Attackers searched for these files despite already having privileged access into the agency's network, and this was most likely an attempt to find additional parts of the network that they could attack. This means they got quite the foothold and had the time to go looking for more information, because the attackers also accessed the local Active Directory, which is usually the user management database that a lot of organizations run. That's a very overview explanation of that, where they modified an Active Directory settings and studied the structure of the agency's internal network. Basically, they then installed a SSH tunnel and a reverse SOX proxy with custom malware and connected a hard drive that they controlled to the agency's network, and then locally mounted it as a remote share so they could easily copy it out and essentially cover their tracks through an encrypted tunnel. That is basically a lot of time and effort that they could easily have had to do all of this that went unnoticed, and it's not done. The CISA said, and I quote, "The mounted file share allowed the actor to freely move during its operations while leaving fewer artifacts for forensic analysis," because they're simply just moving it all out. Furthermore, the attacker created their own local account on the network, and by analyzing forensic evidence, the CISA said the attacker used this account to browse a local network, run PowerShell commands, which obviously are basically scripts that your computer can run to do various things, including malicious things if you know what you're doing, and also to gather important files and then put them into zip archives. The CISA also said that it couldn't confirm if the attacker exfiltrated these zip archives, but this is most likely what happened in the end. So odds are they have no real kind of monitoring, let's say through any kind of infrastructure like a firewall, to see if these files were being moved. And because they were using a reverse proxy and an SSH tunnel, the firewall may not have been able to pick it up depending on the type of firewall they're running. So that's obviously a very serious issue. In addition to all of this, the CISA said the malware that the attackers installed on the federal agency's network, and I quote, was able to overcome the agency's anti-malware protection, and inetinfo.exe, that is the malware, escaped the quarantine that they attempted as well. Nonetheless, investigators said that they detected the intrusion via Einstein, which is the CISA's intrusion detection system that monitors federal civilian networks from a vantage point, and was able to compensate for the attacker bypassing local anti-malware solutions. So at the end of the day, they did a lot of damage here. They had a foothold and created essentially an advanced persistent threat. We have no indication right now, at least I don't know, how long that this organization was in there. But that's a huge, huge problem. And when you combine this with the Department of Interior and Veteran Affairs and everything else that I've talked about with the federal government, we have a real problem when we are applying data security and cybersecurity standards into federal governments. We have, as I've mentioned before, the NIST 800, essentially NIST 853, NIST 800-171, and some other variants of 800 that essentially these government organizations and facilities should be adhering to make sure that they are auditing, logging, detecting these kinds of things, as well as running identity management that's going to understand that the behavior of the user has suddenly changed. Maybe that's a threat, and then excise the user from the network. These are things that should be rather standard for the government, but again, some government agencies are on it, some are not. It's very much a confederacy, as I've written about before, for various publications. But this really underscores a problem we have, because if we have massive data breaches through the U.S. government, it continues to undermine that confidence that the U.S. government should not be not want undermined for the general public. Election woes aside, and undermining that, this is a huge, huge problem that we need to address. And unfortunately, we've seen no movement in cybersecurity enhancement bills going through the Senate, whether it's for the election or otherwise. under this administration. I think that's a very serious issue. I don't care if you love or hate the administration. If I'm focusing singly on that issue, that's a very serious problem that really needs to be addressed. And so I'm hoping, let's say with the upcoming election, if there's a change in the Senate or all of that we might actually be able to get more enhanced cybersecurity bills through. But if the Senate maintains its the exact same makeup that it has before, then we can probably expect 4 more years of potentially falling behind. And I think that in and of itself is a data breach without actually being a physical data breach. So that's an issue. But that is your news of the day. Were you affected? Yeah. We're just going to say yes. That is going to be my default position this week because this week was nuts. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, everyone.